We have heard the word of God for us in the sacred text. Let us now listen for the movement of the Spirit in the silence. Word and words, O God, help us to hear the one among the many. Today, I want to tell you a story about what Lent was like for me in the year 2008. That was the year I gave my husband up for Lent. Okay. I'm glad y'all laughed because you were supposed to laugh, but if you didn't laugh, that was going to go really badly. It was not this husband. It was a different husband. One Friday night in February that year, my first husband of about 5 years came home and confessed to a series of infidelities over the 5 years that we had been married. As you can imagine, it was devastating. It was a time that sent me into kind of complete disorientation. I had only been out of seminary for about 6 years. I was working part-time as a crisis counselor at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which, as you might imagine, is a really hard job to do when you're going through your own crisis. I was very much financially dependent on my husband, who was a musician, so he didn't make that much money, but that I was still dependent on him. And at the time, I was working on preparations to apply to doctoral programs in New Testament. When he left, I needed to find a different place to live. I abandoned what I thought might be temporarily my plans to apply to grad school, and that sent me on a different professional trajectory. I got my first call at a congregation as a part-time youth and college minister down the street at University Baptist. I, of course, had to find a way to make more money, and I had to go through several rounds of STD testing. I started working with a new therapist who required me to meditate every day. She said, "I will work with you if you meditate every day." And there were many nights that was the only way I could get myself to go to sleep. Thanks to the just steadfast support of a really close group of friends, a church that was willing to call me in the middle of kind of a crisis moment in my own life, a lot of personal work and growth, and then meeting my now husband a few years later, I've been able to build a whole different kind of life. Back in 2008, when people would ask me what I was giving up for Lent, I would make that joke. Oh, I decided I would give up my husband. And I thought it was hilarious. But at the time, most people didn't really get the humor. Often that's the way that life-changing shifts happen for us. They're kind of forced upon us. We don't necessarily get to choose them, or even if we kind of choose them, we don't necessarily get to plan out exactly how they're going to go. And as I look out over the congregation today and think about those who are joining us online, I'm keenly aware that many of you have been forced to give up things of your own in the last few years. You too have faced divorce, the deaths of loved ones, job losses and changes, life-altering physical and mental health issues, persecution and discrimination by our state legislature, and many more. We've all survived the collective pandemic trauma, and here in our own church, we have grieved the retirement of two beloved longtime staff members, Tom and Nodi. Many of us are still in the early stages of trying to find our bearings and enough strength and stability to even imagine a new kind of life. This is part of the human condition. Any way you slice it, for most of us, life is this series of endings and beginnings. Some that we actively and willingly choose, and some that are forced upon us, leaving us disoriented and in pain. It might be easy to miss the more personal dimensions of the story of Nicodemus and Abram just from reading the scriptures that we read this morning. But if you think about what might have been going on for the two of them internally when they have these life-altering encounters with the divine, you can see that these are two of our spiritual ancestors who found themselves having to make major life changes. Nicodemus appears 3 times in the Gospel of John. First, in this nighttime encounter with Jesus, where he is somewhat cautiously and carefully coming to consult Jesus about the questions and doubts that are rolling around in his head. The next encounter that Nicodemus has with Jesus is when Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin, which was a council of Pharisees and Sadducees that made judgments about both religious and political types of disputes. Nicodemus advocates that before the Sanhedrin casts any sort of judgment or punishment upon him, that he at least deserves a hearing. And then we see Nicodemus for the third and final time in the Gospel of John, when he is helping Joseph of Arimathea prepare Jesus' body for burial. Nicodemus was a religious leader, a rabbi, the teacher who must become a student once again. Jesus pointedly says to him, "Aren't you a teacher of the law? And you don't understand these spiritual truths?" For someone of such status and education and relative power in his own community, that must have been a humbling encounter. And then we encounter Abram in the book of Genesis, as he and his wife Sarai are just beginning this grand adventure that God will lead them to settle in the land of Canaan, to become the ancestors of so many descendants that they number like the stars in the sky. The text tells us that Abram was 75 years old when this adventure began. This elder statesman was surely ready to settle into retirement, but God sends him away from his home and his kindred to settle a new land and to become the ancestor of a new nation and a new people, God's chosen people. Just when we think we've got it all figured out, we know exactly who we are and the kind of life we want to lead, and we know exactly what to do, and we don't need to change a thing, the Spirit of God inevitably wants to do something new in us and through us. In my experience, the Spirit almost always operates just at the edge of our reason, at the edge of our comfort, at the edge of our imagination, just a little bit past where we think it is we want to go. It's kind of exhausting. Am I right? But friends, perhaps the good news for us this morning is that in the end, it's a good kind of tired. The hope we find in the sacred text this morning is that if we are willing to trust Jesus and to follow him into a new way of being, we are promised nothing short of life that is eternal. That's the promise of Jesus in the Gospel of John. Life that is full of the things that matter most, the things that will last, like love and justice, generosity and healing. In the Gospel of John, that's what believing means. Trusting, following. It's not about some kind of intellectual assent to certain dogma or doctrines. It's about a relationship with Spirit that will renovate your life in big ways and small. And it comes to us no matter how learned or accomplished we are, no matter how old or set in our ways, it comes to us relentlessly, again and again, over and over throughout the ages and stages of our lives. We have only to look at Abram and Sarai to see that there is a kind of fertility, fecundity available to us when we follow the divine into new territory. If you remember this Old Testament Hebrew Bible story, when Abram and Sarai step out in faith, God cures their barrenness. And they give birth to Isaac, who is just the first of Abraham's descendants that will be numerous like the stars in the sky. The wisdom is that this kind of faithful following of Jesus, of the divine, this kind of faithfulness leads to flourishing. Maybe not according to all the metrics of late-stage capitalism, but certainly to the kind of abundant life that Jesus promises us in the Gospels. So how do we begin again? It's really hard, but in some ways it's quite simple. We loosen our hold on certainty. We get more comfortable with learning something new. We trust that God is up to something good. And we follow Jesus into paths unknown. May it be so. Amen.